Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Aman Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going to go through the best guns, mid-ranges and cheapies to consider in the second row forward position. Now I think this video is going to be very popular. A lot of people are going to have a lot of questions around the second row forward because it is a position that has got so many options. So hopefully this video does help you out. If you haven't seen my live stream already or a replay of it, I did go through some of the second row forwards that we are going to discuss there. So if you want to see my initial thoughts, do check that live stream out. Otherwise, stay tuned, like the video if you do enjoy it. Do consider subscribing as well to the channel to see more preseason content and throughout the 2022 season. But let's get straight into it. So I kind of wanted to start off every kind of position profile that we're going to do, just taking a look at the scoring averages of this particular position and see how it's kind of trended over the last 3 seasons. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning that forwards in general and the second row forwards as well have trended a little bit down in terms of the number of players who are in the top 20 averaging players. 2021 was a big example of that as well. Only 3 second row forwards in the top 20. So we had Dave Fafita, Isaiah Papali'i and Angus Crichton, where you can see in 2020 and 2019 we had a lot more players who were considered in this bracket. So Crichton does feature as well in 2020, so he's definitely showing himself to be one of those gun second row forwards that you can rely upon year on year out. We've got Ryan Madison, who had a bit of a down 2021, but he was very good in 2020. So I think there's just a lot of interesting players that we can discuss in the second row forward position, and I think this table kind of highlights that while they kind of have trended down, they still are capable of scoring those really high averages. And I think it's a position that's really important to consider, probably going for 2 gun players in my opinion. So let's get on to who I think those best guns are. So if you had seen the live stream, this chart will look very familiar to you. So this is basically the kind of top guns that I wanted to talk about in the second row forward position, and this bar chart just kind of shows you the distribution of how they actually scored their points in 2021. And so this bar chart shows the kind of distribution of scoring based on base, evasive, creative and scoring averages for 2021. And so I think it's a good guide to see the kind of way that different players can score points, because I do think as we're seeing the new rule changes that have come in for the past couple of seasons, I think players who've got different avenues to point scoring is always going to be kind of an optimal choice. That's why Dave Fafita sits so high up there at a number 1 position. 745k, he is the premium second row forward to go for if you are looking to spend big in this position, because we just saw what tremendous upside he had, averaging 66 minutes, but he had a PPM of 1.29. A lot of that was due in part to the amount of tackle breaks and tries that he scored in 2021. Definitely a big feature of his play is the tackle breaking ability. The base and the work rate, it's just not there in comparison to the other second row forwards. But what we saw, you can see there, that evasive stat, 33 he was averaging in 2021. The next best out of this list is 17 with Isaiah Papali'i, so he's almost doubling the next best. Just showed you how much of an outlier he was last season, and I think he can definitely kind of repeat that as well in 2022. Whether or not he gets that level, we're just not quite sure, but what we do know is that he has got the game for SuperCoach to make those really big scores. You can see even the scoring, a 14 average per game last season, because he was scoring so many tries as well. And so I think if you're looking to spend big in that one position, I 100% do think he is the best second row forward to go for. But I do think with a tight budget at the beginning of the season, and if you hadn't seen my live stream, when you're trying to build a team with the likes of Tom Tavorovich, Nathan Cleary and other guns, it does become very difficult to fit in the likes of a Fafita. So I think for overall squad balance, I'm not sure if I would actually advocate going with him from the start of the season. I think a lot of these other gun options further down the list there, probably from like an Angus Crichton down onwards in terms of price, they're a lot easier to fit in your team. They might not quite deliver the same amount of points, and I guess points is the name of the game, but for that significant money saving, you can definitely make bigger upgrades elsewhere in your team. So I think for overall squad balance, I'm not sure if I would be recommending Dave Fafita, but obviously if you're looking to spend big in your second row forward, hands down he is the best option. Isaiah Papali'i was next up. He was tremendous last season for the Eels. We also saw that he had great attacking upside, fantastic base, so he always had a very good floor there. You can see a 54 per game base. He had good tackle breaking ability, averaging 17, which was next best to Fafita. He did have the ability to also score some tries and set up tries with his offloading as well. Now last season I think it was a little bit easier to get the likes of Isaiah Papali'i because he was priced around 400k at the start of the season. Even when he was going up in price, you could see that his role was solidified. Now we're just not quite sure if he's going to be doing the same for 2022. He is tipped to leave the Eels in 2023. Whether or not they're going to kind of continue with that same forward rotation, because bearing in mind that Isaiah Papali'i did start the season from the bench, I'm not quite sure if that would happen again this season because he did so well for 2021. I do feel like he is going to start, but 688k does seem like a lot of money when there's a couple of unknown factors around him. I kind of also maybe feel that that season was like maybe not necessarily an exception, but one of those seasons where he just he was absolutely tremendous. At that price, you're buying him on the expectation that he can match it. I'm just not quite sure if he can match it. I think he can get close, but at the start of the season, I would hopefully try to bet on the fact that he doesn't, perform to that level, maybe drop some cash and we can pick him up a little bit cheaper. To start the season though, again, squad balance, I'm not sure if I'd be starting off with the Zay Papali'i. You can pick him up in the front row forward as well, which is very handy, but even then 688k, when you can get the likes of Payne Haas for 90k less, I would probably just prefer to go with a Haas. Now from Angus Crichton down in terms of price, it does start to interest me in terms of I think it doesn't affect the overall squad balance that much. At 653k, Angus Crichton, we know, as you saw, was a gun in 2021 and also in 2020. He's just super consistent. You can see 79 minutes he was averaging last season, so he's normally set for 80 minutes, a very solid PPM of 0.95, so he's basically getting almost a point per minute. So basically, the 79 minutes, you're going to expect around a 70 plus average from Angus Crichton. Very, very consistent, very healthy base. He has got some good attacking upside as well, given that the Roosters do tend to score quite a few points, and I do think the Roosters are in for a good year with the return of Luke Keary and further development of Sam Walker. Obviously, you add in James Tedesco, you can see a lot of points potentially from that creative unit, and playing on the edge, I really do like the likes of Angus Crichton at 650k. It is obviously very expensive, but I feel like there's less risk with him because you kind of know what you're going to get. We've seen it the past couple of seasons, so I do think Angus Crichton is a great gun, second row forward to start the season with if you can kind of afford it budget-wise. Cam Murray at 615k, I'm not quite sure if I would go for Cam Murray. I would definitely want to prefer to go for Angus Crichton over Murray. Main reason is that I've kind of noticed a trend in the past couple of seasons that Murray, he ends the season very, very strong, but the beginning of the season, he doesn't quite seem to hit those heights. I feel like the way that he plays kind of matches the Rabbitohs. I feel like the Rabbitohs always finish the year very, very strongly. A part of that is probably due to the influence of Wayne Bennett, who's obviously not going to be coaching them this season, but they kind of had a tendency to kind of load up towards the finals, and I feel like maybe Murray, his attacking upside kind of, once he got into the season, played Origin as well, where he does tend to perform very well. I feel like that's when we started seeing the best of him. At the start of the season though, I haven't seen quite that similar output. So to start the season, I mean, the stats are very good, very healthy base of 51. We all know what a talent he is. Not quite the evasive numbers of the likes of Crichton or Zay Papali'i, but he does have the tendency to score some tries as well. So I don't mind Murray. But with 615k, when I know there are a couple of guys on this list who are cheaper, who I do have a slight favoritism for, maybe that's a bit of a personal bias, but not in the sense that I don't like Cam Murray. I think he's a great player. But for Supercoach purposes, to begin the season, I'm just not quite feeling it with Murray at the moment. And a similar story with Brandon Smith. A lot of cloud up in the air about, well, he is obviously going to be leaving the Storm in 2023, but a little bit of off-season controversy. So it just puts me off just a little bit. And I think Brandon Smith's averages last season were definitely boosted by try scoring. He scored a lot of tries last season. And I don't quite think that's going to be sustainable for 2022. You can see that scoring average of 9, only Crichton and Dave Fifita matched him. And I think even Crichton potentially isn't as sustainable, but Crichton does have the healthier base. So I've got less issues around Crichton. So Brandon Smith, I'm not too keen on. Josh Curran, if any of you did watch that live stream, I'm very keen on Josh Curran. I think significant injuries to Tohu Harris means that there is hopefully going to be some extra minutes in the forwards for the Warriors. Curran did surprise me last season. He had really good base. What I tended to notice was that he actually had decent attacking upside as well. Playing on an edge really does help in terms of your attacking output because you have that ability to break the line, offload, even get involved in try assists as well. And he definitely did score a few tries. He had a few 100+ point games towards the back end of the season. So Curran, if he can kind of repeat that, then I really do like the look of him. And the reason I like him at the start of the season is that the Warriors do have a very nice draw for the opening 6 rounds. So I think, if he is playing good 80 minutes, as you can see, the PPM of 0.96 in 70 minutes, if he was playing the full 80, I would only expect that PPM to just dip just a little bit. So I think he can still average around 65 to 70. And if you can add some potential attacking upside to begin the season, I do really like the look of Josh Curran. And so Curran is definitely high up in my thoughts in terms of making his way into my starting lineup. Frizzell is one of those guys who's super consistent, doesn't really give you any bad scores, but I feel like he does lack that upside. You can see the try scoring, especially playing on an edge. He doesn't seem to get as many tries as some of these other second row forwards. I did end the season with him when the Knights had a very nice draw, but I think if I was just picking a guy that I could set and forget for the rest of the season, Frizzell probably wouldn't be one of those guys. I would look at guys like Curran, Crichton, and eventually a Dave Fifita as well. I just don't think Frizzell, even despite that tremendous base, I just don't think he quite fits that kind of category for me. Vita Pangai, again, very, very interesting proposition. You can actually pick him up in the front row forward, which I think is maybe a better position for him, given that, there's a lot of other good second row forward options, and there doesn't tend to be as many in the front row forward. Now he's gone to a new club in the Bulldogs. You can see the base is not really how he gets his point scoring. A lot of it is the attacking upside. It's the tackle breaking and the offloads. The guy loves to offload, and when you see him offloading like crazy, you know that's good for SuperCoach because you know that he's getting a lot of points. From what I've read in the offseason at the Bulldogs, he should be playing on an edge and hopefully on left edge outside of Matt Burton. I do think that is good news for Tevita Pangai in terms of being able to get a lot of good access to the ball, giving the chance to run at defenses and maybe crash over for a few tries as well. So I think Pangai, kind of what I touched on previously, he kind of has that game where he can get his points in a variety of ways. The base is not as good as some of the other second row forwards, but we know he's got that upside out of 18 evasive stats. He can find the try line as well. And so the Bulldogs have loaded up. So I think it kind of depends on what you feel about the Bulldogs in general. So Tevita Pangai at 570k, I do like the look of. I was a bit negative of him at the beginning of last season, and he started the season very well. So let's see if you can do it twice in a row. I do think Pangai is a good selection as well for second row forward and also for front row forward. And Ryan Madison, the final kind of gun second row forward that I wanted to discuss. So he really does interest me as well. We saw a bit of a funny season with him for, last year. He obviously had a lot of significant HIA injuries, so he was out of the game for quite a long time. I did start the season with him, as did many, and as soon as he picked up a head knock, you basically knew that you had to trade him out because he's had such a bad run of previous head knocks that when he gets a head knock, he has to take a lot of time away from the game, which is obviously good for his health, but for SuperCoach purposes, it's not good when you have a player who potentially is a risk. But I don't think that should stop you from getting the likes of Ryan Madison, because I feel like any player could get a head knock. Any player who hasn't had a previous history of getting a head knock, if they get one that's bad enough, all of a sudden they're going to have to be a sell as well. So I'm not going to use that as a limiting factor against Madison. Those are kind of incidences that you can't plan for. What I do like with Madison is that he had a down year, so he is nicely priced at 569k. We saw just in the year previously, he averaged 75 with tremendous base. You can see the base is good there. He was getting 49 base in just 69 minutes, which I think is tremendous kind of work rate, and he can definitely keep that up as well if those minutes tick up to 80 minutes. We saw that he was getting rotated a little bit. Part of that could have been due to the Eels having quite a few forwards, so they'll kind of had that flexibility of playing around. But Madison, we know, is their kind of go-to back rower. I believe him and IPAP. So if he plays full 80 minutes and they stop with the switching of second row forwards and the 5'8" and the halfback like they did last season, I think trials would be a good way to kind of get a good feel for that. I am really keen on Ryan Madison as well. I just remember at the beginning of last season, Angus Crichton and Ryan Madison were very similarly priced, and most people felt that they were very similar. You can get Ryan Madison for a significant saving to Angus Crichton, and I do think he is hopefully going to be in for a good season for 2022. So Ryan Madison, I'm definitely keen on. And so picking two guns here, because I do think going with two guns second row forwards is a good way to kind of build your squad. Just for kind of overall squad balance, I do like some of the guys in this 500k price range. And so it might be a little bit obvious based on the way that I've been speaking about it. I really like the look of Josh Curran. I really like Ryan Madison and Tevita Pangai as well. I like the look of these three. Any two of those three, I would definitely not argue against if I saw that in your starting draft. If you want to pay extra for Angus Crichton, again, I don't really think I can dispute that as well. We all know how consistent he is. Just thinking about in terms of starting your team to begin the season when budget's a little bit tighter, I do like to go for some of these slightly cheaper guys, but I think if you want to go for those guys who you know what you're going to get, Dave Fafita, Angus Crichton, I really like the look of. Now, taking a look at the mid-range second row forward, so again, just another point around overall squad balance. I think going with one or two mid-range second row forwards is a nice way to kind of set yourself up in terms of having a couple of nice price points and players who potentially can deliver a little bit higher on the average that they're priced at. So Tamalolo is an interesting one. We all know how good of a SuperCoach option has been in the past, but the word is that he is maybe playing at prop to begin the season. At prop, I would expect the PPM to go up from 0.94 from last season, but those minutes at 59, they might trickle down just a little bit more because they are very protective of him. And so I think if the PPM goes up a little bit but the minutes go down, he still might just have the same season as what he had last year. And at his price at 486k, that might just be what we need from him. But I think at the start of the season, when you may be thinking of players who can go a little bit higher than what they're priced at, I'm just not sure if Tamalolo is one player I'm going to start off with. And I think there's a few other mid-ranges that you can consider who are a little bit cheaper, and even some other cheapies we're going to get onto that might not match him in terms of points. But I think at the start of the season, when you're trying to balance points and cash generation, I'm just not sure if Tamalolo can offer enough in either category for me to justify starting with him, especially when we're not 100% certain on the role that he's going to have. I think we'd all prefer him to playing at lock and, big minutes. Playing at prop, the PPM will go up, but not sure if that's going to deliver into the Supercoach points that we're after. Sitili Tupouniua, I was not very positive on, I think, at the beginning of last season, but my thinking has definitely changed just because of the way that we saw scoring last season. Just got to a point where we kind of had to start prioritizing these guys. We've got that higher attacking upside. They can score a lot of tries. They can break the line, line breaks, tackle breaks, etc. And Tupouniua definitely fit the bill. Definitely not one of your traditional second row forwards who's got a lot of base. You can see the base there is significantly down on a lot of these other second row forwards. But I feel like if you're building a team where you've got, guys like Crichton, Madison, guys who've got good work rate and are not going to give you those inconsistent scores that often, I think taking a chance on someone like Tupouniua who can give you those big 100+ point scores, I don't mind, as well, just a way to balance your overall squad. And we saw him score quite a few tries last season, and I think that the Roosters are in for a better year. I think the return of Luke Keary is going to help someone like Tupouniua massively as well. So Tupouniua is definitely someone I'm thinking about quite a bit to build my team as well. If you saw the live stream, I did also tip him up, and someone in the chat also made a very good point that these kind of double ups of Luke Keary and Tupouniua, knowing he's got that creative player to send him over the try line, hopefully more often than last season, means I do think that Tupouniua could be a good option to consider as well. Jai Arrow is an interesting one. You can get him at front row forward, which is why I've got the asterisk there, and I do think I'd probably prefer to get him at front row forward. We saw last season he was spending a lot of the time on the bench being kind of used as more of an impact player, which he was actually quite good at. We saw his scores were actually better being used off the bench. Now, we're not sure what the rotation with the forwards is going to be now that they've got the new coach in and Wayne Bennett has left. And I think at 458k, it's not too expensive that you can maybe take a punt on someone like Jai Arrow. But I think given some other options in the mid-range, like I probably do prefer a Tupouniua and some of the other cheapies that we're going to touch on later, I do think they're not necessarily safer in terms of points. Again, when you're working with a tight budget, looking for cash generation, it's kind of similar to Tamalolo. I'm not sure if Arrow can get either the points or the cash generation to justify it. Similar to a Tamalolo, whereas, someone like Tupouniua, I think potentially could be in for another big year and another year where he gets a lot of tries as well, so he can deliver that upside. Victor Radley is interesting. When he plays 80 minutes, he does tend to get good points, and he is involved in the Roosters attack very often, but more often than not is being used as a link man and doesn't take as many runs as some of your other second row forwards. And it sounds kind of silly, but Radley has had a lot of suspension issues at the judiciary, and so I think he's got a pretty bad record, and I feel like if he has any other kind of suspension or something against him, any infringement, you might not see him in your team for quite a while. So I do think it's a bit of a risk with Radley. And so again, Radley, I'm not 100% sure if I'd start the season with. Similar with Kurt Capewell, a lot of the appeal around Capewell last season was that you could get him in the center wing. But even him playing in the back row, with the Panthers side where he was able to get a lot of tries, Nathan Cleary was playing on his side. We didn't even see him do that well, I think, for Supercoach purposes. Now he's moved to the Broncos. He probably is going to play the full 80 minutes in the back row there, I'd imagine. But with not as good of an attacking unit or creative unit around him, I just don't see any kind of upside with Capewell. And Liam Martin, who's going to probably fill in that remaining back row position at the Panthers, I think he could be an okay option, one to monitor for sure at 429k. If he does get to play big minutes at the Panthers, you can see he was averaging 58 last season. A lot of that was due to the fact that he was being used off the bench quite a bit, more of an impact player playing in prop as well. And so the PPM, if he does play the full 80 minutes in the back row, it might hover around that 0.85. But if he is playing bigger minutes, I do think that this average can tick up by maybe potentially 5 to maybe even 10 points potentially, because the base is okay from him. He's got good work rate. He looks good in the eye as well. He obviously got named in Origin. I just don't know if I'd start the season with him, but definitely someone that I would be monitoring as well if he does look good at the beginning of the season. He's kind of at that good price at 429k, where if you don't start with him, but you need to get to him because he's he started the season very strongly, it's not that difficult to fit in. And so I do prefer, if you can, maybe starting the season with someone a little bit more expensive like a Tupouniua. If you need to downgrade to Liam Martin, you can do it later on pretty. And finally, taking a look at the cheapies in the second row forward position, I've got the likes of Ruben Costa and Lukey here, both at the Cowboys. They're not necessarily cheapies in terms of the price category. Maybe I should have put them in the mid-range section, but I do like the look of the pair of them. Now, Cotta has been tipped to be actually starting in the number 13 position for the Cowboys. He had a very, very good work rate actually last season. So he played around 45 minutes on average, and he was averaging 48 in base. Now, I don't expect that kind of PPM to be maintained if he's playing bigger minutes at 13, but it's a good indication that when he plays, he generally is a good hard worker. And so I think for a cheapie at 381k, not necessarily dirt cheap, but he has got that good potential if he plays extra minutes in a starting role. Hopefully means he can deliver additional value, and I think he is a very good selection as a cheapie / mid-ranger in the second row forward. Lukey doesn't quite have the kind of base stats, but he did have some attacking upside. You can see that he's got 5 in the scoring average and 8 in terms of the evasive numbers. Part of that is probably just due to the position that he's playing as a number 12 and on the edge. He was playing on the bench last season though, so if he does again get a starting role, you'd hopefully see additional minutes, and hopefully that means additional points value as well. So I do like the pair of both Lukey and Cotter. In my live stream draft, I had both of them in my second row forward, and I think if you're looking to save a little bit of money in the second row forward, maybe going for two of these guys or one of these guys instead of one of those mid-ranges, if that additional saving lets you go from, let's say like a KMRA up to like a day for feeder, then I think having guys like this is really, really useful. Now, the other kind of players we're going to get into are probably more of your traditional kind of cheapies. So in the first up, we've got Targo from the Panthers. A big benefit of him is that he is dual listed. You can pick him up in both the second row forward and the center wing, and the reports are that he's probably going to be first in line to be playing that empty center wing spot for the Panthers now that Momorowski has left for the Roosters. I think at 288k is at a very nice price that we can consider both in your center wing and also in your second row forward as a good cheapie option. You'd expect playing at center wing, obviously he's not going to have the stats of a second row forward, but he'll be playing on the edge of a very good attacking Panthers outfit. So I do think Targo is a pretty obvious selection if he is in that starting position at center for the Panthers, either in the center wing or in your second row forward. Bullimore, now moved from the Broncos to the Manly Sea Eagles, has been tipped to potentially get a bench position, and so he can also be picked at front row forward or second row forward, and so I don't mind him in either of those positions. 280k, again, if he gets additional minutes, I do like the look of him as well as a cheapie. Sean Bloor, I've added him here because he was tipped last season to be a bit of a cheapie. The problem was that when he actually did play, we didn't quite see the kind of attacking upside or the work rate that we saw glimpses of when he was playing. I do prefer the likes of Targo and Bullimore. Their stats are just a little bit better. They've got some different upside as well in comparison to Bloor, and so I definitely do prefer Targo or Bullimore for that reason. Mo Roa from the Melbourne Storm, now he could be a nice early season cash cow given that Nelson Asofa-Solomona and Tui Kamakamika are both going to be potentially out for the early parts of the season for the Storm, and I think given that gap in the forwards, we could see some other cheaper props at the Melbourne Storm do very well for SuperCoach purposes, especially as an early season cash cow. 205k, it's almost basement price, and so I think having him in your front row forward or your second row forward as a cheapie, not a bad option to consider. Finally, Pierre Kura from the Broncos. Now, he had a pretty memorable debut for the Broncos last season. 12 points there, you could say, well, that's not very good point scoring. He did lose 10 points as well, getting a sin bin on his debut, but he has been tipped as one of the future rookies to look out for the Broncos, so not quite sure if he's going to make their forwards because they have pretty decent depth actually in the forwards, the Broncos, but if we ever see him kind of turn up on the bench or a starting position at 188k, could be a good cheapie to look out for. Definitely he's going to be one of those guys I think we're going to have to see, in a few lineups in the preseason and the trials as well before we have confidence picking him. But at 188k, he might be one of those guys that you can pick on your bench, just if with the feeling that, maybe around State of Origin period, he might then get a run in and could make some coin at that point in the season. That's it, guys. That is my kind of run through of the guns, the mid-ranges, and the cheapies in the second row forward position. The video is probably going to be a little bit longer than some of the other ones, but I think there's just so many players to talk about in the second row forward that I think the video kind of justified it as well. So hopefully, if you guys got some value out of that, really appreciate a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more NRL SuperCoach content. And if any of you are interested in Fantasy Premier League content, do check out my Fantasy Premier League channel as well. I'll leave a link for that in the description below. And do join my group league. There's a link for that as well in the description. And I'll see you all in the next video.